You need to get clarity about your own mission, vision, and values. And I know that many times we look at those as just words on posters in conference rooms or by the time clock. But the reality is, if they are meaningful, they really do resonate with incoming demographics. So younger folks, be they millennials or Generation Z, because you stand for something and it's meaningful. And people want to come to places that stand for something, contribute to something, and we're a great industry.
Put that coffee down.
Creators are leaders. Be careful what kind of leaders you're producing here.
Helen, we're both in sales.
Let me tell you why I suck as a salesman.
They realized that to be in power, you didn't need guns or money or even numbers. You just needed the will to do what the other guy wouldn't.
I'm not leaving. The show goes on.
Well, hello there, friend. Welcome to the Construction Leadership Podcast, where we deliver ideas and insights from leaders across the construction industry every single week to help you lead more effectively. This episode is brought to you by our friends at Capital One Trade Credit. If you are interested in growing your top-line revenue while decreasing risk heading into some unexpected 2023 times, you, my friend, might be interested in Capital One Trade Credit. How do you find it? It's a great question. I would recommend you Google Capital One Trade Credit. So last month on Thursday, October 20th and Friday, October 21st, I was thrilled to be part of the annual convention for the WCLBMA. I know, a lot of letters that are smashed together. It's the West Coast LBM Association, and it was a fantastic event for a very specific reason. They had a playbook on how to have an incredible event. And I'm going to give you another pile of letters that I've smashed together and created my own acronym, because that's about the only way I can remember multiple things at the same time. And the playbook the WCLBMA used has 5 components, I believe. And using this playbook creates an event that licks the competition. That's right, licks, L-I-C-K-S. So what did the WCLBMA do that made such a memorable event that is going to only help them have a bigger, better event next year? Number one, the L stands for location. They had a fantastic location in San Diego at the Gaslamp District, and it was 2 blocks away from Petco Park, where the San Diego Padres actually that day beat in the playoffs the Philadelphia Phillies. Did I go to it? Yes, I did. I felt like the Lord sent me there for a reason, and I had to pay a lot of money for a ticket. It was awesome. So that's the L. The I is you got to have industry leaders. And we're going to talk about the industry leaders that were part of this panel conversation, including Mr. George Emmerson, board chair of Sierra Pacific Industries and the largest landowner in the United States, Mr. Steve Patterson, president and CEO of Central Valley, Mr. Steve Swanson, president and CEO of the Swanson Group, and Mr. Victor Fresca, VP Sales and Operations at Dixieline. So that's the I. You got to have industry leaders and at a great location. The C stands for competition. You got to have some small, fun way to get people competing. Why? Because we're competitive people. Now, in this situation, we had people that came with their spouses, in some cases, their kids. So the WCLBMA invested in Pop-A-Shot. That's right. They had 2 Pop-A-Shot machines that are mini basketballs and small basketball hoops, and it was sponsored by Boise Cascade, and it was a hit. So we had men, women, young, old, everybody participating, and we had 2 different 16-team brackets. So we had a team challenge, and we also had a singles challenge, and it was awesome. So that's the C. The K stands for an awesome keynote. They had Bill Walton, one of the top 50 players of all time. Bill Walton multiple times was the College Player of the Year, #1 overall draft pick by the Portland Trail Blazers, won a championship with them, and then he also won a championship with the Boston Celtics. In between, he played 14 years. 9.5 of those years, he was out because of genetic bone issues in his feet, and his knees and his back. Anyway, incredible story. So fantastic keynote. And then the S stands for leveraging social media. So we recorded podcast episodes, including this one here. We shared videos and photos on Instagram, and we also have videos of my one-on-one conversation and podcast with Mr. Bill Walton. So there it is. That is the playbook, and that's why this event was so awesome. So again, if you want to create an event that licks the competition, that's competing for the attention and time and capital of the people that are in your network, again, it's location, it's industry leaders like the ones that we're going to have on this panel. We have competition. The Papa Shot was a great use of that. Incredible keynote like Bill Walton, and leveraging social media. So that's the playbook. That's what they did to make an event great. And I think that model in and of itself is something that you can probably use, whether you're on boards of associations like this or within your own team. All right. So in this panel discussion, it was led by Mr. Matt Saunders, the Senior Vice President of Building Products Research at John Burns Real Estate Consulting, which is the premier consulting firm in our industry when it comes to discussions about the macro environment, demographics, rising rates and inflation, the remodeling market, new construction, the whole deal. John Burns Real Estate is the name brand in the space, and Matt Saunders was a fantastic moderator for this event. So again, who's on this panel? We have George Emmerson from Sierra Pacific, Steve Patterson from Central Valley, Steve Swanson from the Swanson Group, and Mr. Victor Fresca from Dixieline. They're talking about the macro environment with inflation, the slowing economy. We're talking about lumber supply, labor shortages. We're talking about recruiting talent, and we're talking about consolidation. You are going to get so many insights and different perspectives from these valuable individuals. And I will slide in during the recording of this that you'll hear to make sure you know exactly who's talking, because you do have quite a few voices in there. So without further ado, please enjoy this panel discussion moderated by Matt Saunders of John Burns Real Estate Consulting on the future of lumber industry panel discussion. As always, thank you for listening. So the first speaker you will hear now is Mr. Steve Patterson, President and CEO of Central Valley.
For us, when we look at new business segments, we also assess the risk. So for something that is far afield of what we do today, that's obviously a more risky venture. So if we were to get into casinos, obviously that's not something we do. We don't have the expertise. There's nothing that we can parlay from our existing core strengths into that segment. In the ag area, there was product overlap. So for example, with the PVC, a lot of you sell that already. Central Valley just sells it in much greater quantities. We're doing truckload after truckload after truckload. There's a skill set overlap. So again, we are in the distribution business. We warehouse products. So it's very similar to what is required of our vineyard customers as it is for our contractor customers. The segment there too is it behaves in a similar way. So for example, on the builder side, the builder, there's also the vineyards, the owners, and then there's also subcontractors. So for us, there's framers, and then in the vineyard side, there's vineyard managers. And in many ways, they behave in the same fashion. So what we supply to them, the service that we offer, the products that they demand are very similar. And then the other advantage for us is that obviously we're in a geographically beneficial area, being in the middle of the Napa County, also servicing Sonoma County and into the San Joaquin Valley. And then this is also, at the time, was an underserved market. So it was highly fragmented. There weren't a lot of, irrigation supply companies at large levels. There were no Home Depots in the world. And so it was an opportunity for us to get in early and obviously establish ourselves. So it's, in a nutshell, it's a segment. It's about 20% of our business. So again, our top line is about 150 million. So you can do the math. So it's a significant business for us, and it's very attractive. And so, and it's also one that runs a little bit counter-cyclical to building. So when we look at our top line for next year, yes, we're predicting to be down. That's largely driven by our contractor segment that services Sacramento and a little bit of the change in the selling price. However, that's offset by some of these other segments like ag, which will trail. And we're projecting that it'll be quite strong for 2023.
Great. Other thoughts, non-traditional segments, counter-cyclical plays, suggestion for those that given the outlook for housing may reduce the correlation of the business.
Now you will hear from Vic Fresca of Dixieline Lumber as he's talking about ADUs, accessory dwelling units.
Well, I wouldn't say it's not non-traditional, but like we talked about, there is still a shortage of housing. And we've seen some of our locations have to shift to ADUs have become quite popular. And, people need to create more space. And I think depending on the market you're in and, whether that's creating more space for your own household due to, inflationary issues and having to have more extended family live with you, or at the same time, what we've seen a lot in the San Diego and Orange County area, if you can put it up, the rental income you receive from that is significant. So, some of our bigger locations, yards that traditionally are more tied to single family production, have shifted over to, hey, we got to make sure we have the product to build these ADUs that are really been popular through the pandemic. One other thing, one of the things we're seeing too is, we've always kind of laughed at the prefab. We've been doing some research on some of the companies out there that are really in that ADU segment on the prefab, and they do a good job and they're attractive. And so I think that's something for the traditional dealer, we're going to need to look at and figure out how are we going to compete against that. Because the efficiencies in the building really are there, and they're not a joke anymore. Years ago, they were kind of a joke. Some of these companies have really done a good job in what they're manufacturing. Given
what we see in terms of labor constraints, I think panelization, even full on modular, is going to start to gain share. So just as something to think about. So turning to the issue of lumber supply, there are important dynamics that are ongoing in terms of supply dynamics. Canada has reduced its annual allowable cut. It's no longer thought to be a source of growth right now. Even the Canadian companies, such as West Fraser, are shifting their operations to the south. Like to get the thoughts of the panel here. What is happening with lumber capacity in Canada, the West, and the South, and what are the implications for your market? Maybe Steve Swanson, we can start with you. How timberland availability is paramount concern, and some of the thoughts you shared previously.
Now you'll hear from Mr. Steve Swanson of the Swanson Group.
Well, for sure, the production from Western Canada in particular you're not going to see increases for decades. They had a massive beetle kill issue. They harvested way over their allowable cut for 10 years to get in front of that dead timber. It's done, and they've had to retract. And the shift started in about 2005 with Canadian companies buying resources in the U.S. South, and they have increased both numbers of mills and the quality of the mill has also increased, but the productivity isn't as good as it is here in the West. The Western mills, the ones that certainly that we operate, you have to be way more efficient because we have had high lumber or timber prices for decades. So low timber prices, your focus is on productivity. When you have high timber prices, your focus becomes on recovery because the raw log is your highest cost. So you're not going to see any growth in the West in terms of production because we're sitting here with the vast majority of the timber supply being controlled by the federal government. So in Oregon in particular, we're like 68% of the timbered acres are federal, and they supply 8% of the volume. So we're hamstrung with all of our volume coming from private. And then we've got the wildfire situation. We had 1 million acres burned in 2020. 500,000 of that was private. 98% of that got harvested, which contributed to relatively low log prices during that big run up in lumber prices, which was really good for us. But the other 500,000 acres that was federal, the target for salvage was 3%. That was the target, and they didn't get there. So you're seeing these constraints where we're going to see some shifts in Western Oregon because that 500,000 acres that was harvested, that was probably 10 years worth of harvest in 1 year. takes a long time for that forest to regrow.
The next thoughts on this from the panel are coming from Mr. George Emmerson of Sierra Pacific Industries.
I think Steve's right. We're not going to, the Canadians have issues up there, and in the past, they've been pretty resilient coming back into the United States really strong. And the West, we're basically manufacturing all the trees that we grow at this point. I mean, or what's available is a better way of putting it, because the public's probably going to grow a little bit, but not a lot. But the Southeast, I think, is where you're going to see some growth yet. And that's why the Canadian companies have grown down there. I think the Canadian companies have, it's like 42% of the capacity in the Southeast today is owned by Canfor, West Fraser, or Interfor.
I'd like to turn to the issue of positioning for the next level of growth, and particularly attracting leaders and attracting and retaining talent. So I think we can all agree that the lumber industry is vital for housing and for the U.S. economy. And despite a slowing economy, the labor market remains really tight. It's very difficult to attract and retain talent. What can the industry do to attract and retain talent as our aging workforce retires and position for the next generation of leaders and workers?
Well, I think it's been an issue for us for a number of years, really probably 5 years after I started in the industry, which is about 21. You started talking about succession planning and the transfer of knowledge from the generations that were leaving. And, at that time, it was having good development plans for incoming employees and ones, putting them on a leadership track. And that really seemed to start to shift as the next generation came in. It's very difficult now. We will do manager and training programs and bring people in and really put them through some unbelievable management leadership classes, just basic knowledge of the industry. We'll get them involved with outside organizations that support our industry. But in the end, it's not coming quick enough for them. And they're not achieving the level of success that they feel they should. And I think it varies from region to region. Most of the markets I've overseen have been in large metro markets where this industry doesn't pay as well to talent, top level talent. And a lot of times they'll shift to another industry. And my feeling and what we continue to work on is it's something that is not going to go away. We try and let people know by introducing them outside our organization, but to the industry. It is a great industry. There's great people in it. But if we don't make an effort for them to see really what it's about and what it has to offer, they tend to lose interest, because we're not going to get there on salary, wage alone. We have to figure out ways to keep them attracted to our company and the industry outside of just salary and wage. And there isn't a silver bullet answer, but I can tell you, what's been most successful for us is making sure they know their development and growth and career is the most important thing.
Really making that visible. Other thoughts on this, attracting, retaining, especially from the generational companies? It'd be great to hear your thoughts on that.
Sure, I'll jump in, at least to start with. So in terms of attracting and retaining talent, I'm thinking in particular of our own efforts. Clearly, we've made an effort to be a best place to work. That certainly is something that you can advertise to folks. It sings to the people who are out in the marketplace who might be potential employees. Again, I think one of the items that I find interesting is you need to get clarity about your own mission, vision, and values. And I know that many times we look at those as just words on posters in conference rooms or by the time clock. But the reality is, if they are meaningful, they really do resonate with incoming demographics. So younger folks, be they millennials or Generation Z, because you stand for something. And it's meaningful, and people want to come to places that stand for something, contribute to something, and we're a great industry. We provide housing. It's a basic human right, and it's something that certainly is going to be attractive to folks that want to work at a place that contributes to their communities. in terms of, thinking differently, I was thinking a little bit about the productivity equation that you mentioned earlier. And from my perspective, one of the focuses for our human resources has been on that onboarding and orientation. And I know we all have it, but the point is really trying to make it as strong as you possibly can, because first of all, it really resonates with someone when you make sure, for example, oftentimes just having the business cards ready, just having the computer in its place, sending a gift basket to the person's house a week before they come on board. I mean, that sends a message. That sends a message that you care, and it certainly starts the relationship off on the right foot. The onboarding, that's critical because with that productivity issue that we're running into, you want people to be as effective as possible, as quickly as possible. And I think that's the mantra, that's the equation that we really need to solve, because we just can't onboard people and let them figure it out. The old sales method, you throw them the car keys and then go out there and start hunting for customers. That's not going to be an effective way to bring people on board. And it doesn't have the same satisfaction for the person either. The other item that I would consider thinking about is, in my mind, there's a movement towards visual versus manuals, reading. It's just, you can see it from the folks in terms of how they respond to visual cues on their phones, all the videos. And it's just the more visual you can become in terms of onboarding people, be they videos, signs. For example, I was talking with Jill and folks at Healdsburg Lumber there earlier, and I know they've got a facility they're working on, and one of the people they're using is a company out of Canada. And one of the items that I found super attractive was a kind of a blowout of a plumbing arrangement. And I thought, man, that is really cool just for onboarding new employees. If you can show them, these are the parts that go into plumbing. This is hot. This is cold. This is copper. This is a fixture, and so on and so forth. That's a heck of a lot easier than handing them a 30-page manual and say, here's Moen faucet, go figure it out. So I think the visual aspect I recommend also, because many of you, like us, you have customers and employees where language can be a barrier. So I sat with a customer on our ag side, and he described that one of the things they were finding is more migrants came from southern parts of Mexico, Central America. There's more dialects spoken. So it's not necessarily Spanish. It's other languages. And these languages, in many ways, do not have a written form. And so imagine when you're trying to onboard people, be they laborers or in the fields or at the job sites, they're not necessarily going to be able to read some of the materials that you have currently in your portfolio. So you're going to have to explain it in other ways. It's a challenge that we have moving forward. So again, I think just visually trying to figure out how you communicate is going to make your folks more productive and help with some of that labor issue moving forward.
Really great insights. Are the thoughts on this?
Man, I just have just a couple comments. But in our business, I mean, we're truly an industrial environment. I mean, it's making lumber, millwork, windows. I mean, it's a production line, manufacturing type environment. So it's a little bit different than what Steve's talking about. But we're challenged with in the same labor, not the same labor pool, but we're challenged by competing things such as where you can work from home, the Microsofts, the Googles. I mean, we have to change our work environment to where it's more conducive and people want to be there. Right. And I mean, it's you can't stand around up to your rear in sawdust and strips and whatever and dirt and grease and everything like that. So our environment has changed substantially. When you go through our plants, we continually try to get away from the manual labor and get into and it costs just a ton of money. But things like you don't see very many people today. You don't see people touching the lumber like you used to. And we've got to continue to move away from that. I mean, the onboarding, all that stuff that you talk about, it's nothing but a failure when we hire somebody and they quit in the first year. I mean, in our perfect world, we hire somebody 45 years from now, they retire. That's perfect. But, it's just a challenge we're faced with, and we're going to have to deal with the wage issue. We're going to have to deal with benefit issues. And that means, we're probably looking at significant increases as long as we're short on labor or labor tends to be tight. And we just have to address it. It's a fact We can't operate our plants without people, so we have to make it so we're going to have those people.
And here again is Steve Swanson.
I'd say the same thing in terms of the plants. They are a factory, and it is hard work. So our focus is on productivity increases through automation. So the number of people that we have in a facility, I mean, the production per man hour keeps going up because the automation takes over. It's about 80% of our people are very stable, so 5 years and longer in terms of employment. We'd like to think they're going to be there 40 years, and a few do. But the bottom 20% of our labor force is turning over 5 times a year. It's just an incredible turnover. We have people that they go through the whole interview process. They're onboarded. They've done their drug test. They come to work. They punch in. They sit in the lunchroom before shift. They look around. They walk out. I mean, they don't even do a thing. We have people that walk out at first break, walk out at lunch, walk out after a week, and that's become commonplace. So from a cost standpoint, we have about 800 employees across 3 facilities. We're probably carrying 50 extra people just for the number of folks that don't show up every single day. And that's a significant cost for us, not only just having extra bodies, but having people that they step into the production world and they're not really used to it. So you're not as efficient as you might be if you had a more stable workforce.
And Steve, I just add that 20% are the ones that are typically doing the less skilled jobs as well.
Yes.
And so those are the jobs, hopefully, that are easier to, over time, get rid of.
We built a new plywood mill in 2016, and we really focused on automation there, but it still has 270 people working in it. And it would have been 320, 330 if we hadn't done the automation that we did.
I think there's parallels here with the rest of the economy as well, that as the labor force continues to shrink, immigration policy is just not helping. We're going to have to lean more on technology and automation. No one silver bullet there. I'd like to close on the trend of consolidation that we're seeing within the LBM space. Really a question for the panel. What are your thoughts on what is driving consolidation, and what will the industry structure look like going forward? And also, how do you think the independents should position themselves and adapt?
Well, I think I can start a little bit. I've been involved in some consolidations over the years. And when you look back to the independent side of the business, in the end, as you consolidate, it's really still about the company you're buying, their leadership, their sales team, and their employees. That's what makes the difference. If it's not going to be a good fit, they're really, I haven't seen any acquisitions, consolidations where you come in and say, well, we just want the land and the equipment and we're going to bring in our own people. It's local relationships that make the difference. Obviously, there's benefits along the way, economies of scale. When you look at backroom function, things of that nature. But, in the last couple of years have been extremely aggressive in seeing consolidations. But, some work out well, some don't. But in the end, it comes down to it has to be a good fit. And because you're not buying the land, you're not buying the buildings, you're buying the business, and the business is the people and the leadership team. One of the things, that we're looking out over the next couple of years, and you kind of wonder where we're going to be in 5 years. And I think, with all the technology, the automation, you have component plants out there that are all robotic now. I don't know how many people have had the opportunity to truly walk in one and see one. A couple of years ago, they were we're working on it. They may or may not work. I've seen them. They work, and they work well, and they're extremely efficient when you look at the board per foot produced per man hour. So I think with everything going on, you couple that with the manufacturing of homes off site. I think we're poised for some type of change. And I think there's a lot of people, looking they still think we're a fragmented industry, and they're looking to consolidate it from that aspect also.
You'd also mentioned the high cost of regulatory compliance as well. Part of that economies of scale potentially, and how it's difficult for the independents to actually adjust to that cost.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially in California, I think all of us that do business in California, whether you've had to deal with the carb on your trucks or forklifts, or having to implement a lumber tax, which really meant nothing into your ERP system. The business is constantly having to adapt. It's going to cost money. At times having that, having a larger organizations that you're able to pull on those costs really truly help, because I know when we were functioning as an independent dealer, there were a couple things that came in that really changed the way or how we could invest in our people or our equipment for a couple of years because of a regulatory adjustment we needed to make to stay compliant. So
thank you, everyone, for answering these really topical questions. We're almost out of time, but I did want to open it up for the audience for any questions.
And here, as a question from the audience, is from Mr. Victor House-Manninger.
With respect to lumber supply, what's your thoughts about exports of lumber that have been going on in the past to China and others? Has there been an impact on having supply available? Is that changing? What do you see going on with respect to export of lumber?
Well, our lumber prices have gotten, it's all a matter of economics. And when our lumber prices get low for a period of time, we see export business as they stay strong. And, the U.S. economy, even for all the weaknesses that we have, the U.S. economy is still one of the better places. And, you look at the value of our dollar today and so forth, it makes, export just not viable at this point. Nothing is forever, but we're in a cycle right now. We're at the part of the cycle where I don't think we'll see much export of lumber in the next several years. And, you asked, Matt, what we're looking like in the next 2 years, the first question out. If you look long term, I think things look pretty good for our industry. We're in a really good spot. And so when you ask about export, I don't really think it's going to be a driver in the next, we're at the top of the cycle for quite a while.
I agree on the lumber export side. I think one of the challenges as an industry that we face as a producer, it's log exports. That's still a huge number just going overseas. And we're the only developed nation in the world that exports raw material that's in short supply.
All right, we got time for one last question here. You touched on wildfires a little bit. How much have the wildfires affected volatility of prices, the quality of the lumber, the species you're able to cut, that type of thing?
Well, in our company, we have about 50% of what we consume comes from our own timberland typically. And wildfires have a huge impact because once that fire burns, we have a plan where we're going to harvest and what we're going to do for the next 2 years. All of a sudden, you got 20 or 30 or 40,000 acres that burn up. Your plan gets thrown out and you have to develop a new plan. And you don't have a lot of time. You've got like a couple days because we want to get out there and get the damaged timber harvested immediately. I think it has some impact on the quality. You all see it. You see it in the products. We do everything we can, but we can't keep bugs from getting into dead trees. And we focus on going after we always categorize the burns black, brown, and green. We go after the black first because that's where the bugs are first going to go. We go after the brown second and the green third. And that doesn't mean we re-enter each time, but we try to identify which areas to go after. It has a huge impact in the economics of, log prices or raw material values and everything. And as we've seen in California and Oregon the last couple of years, log resource prices have been down considerably just due to the fires and everything. A tremendous amount of volumes come on the market. We can't control what species all of a sudden we have to cut what burned. And so, and it's unfortunate because, the supply chain gets all messed up. You want Doug fir, and suddenly we've got a bunch of pine. Pine doesn't substitute for Doug fir very well. But, we just have to deal with it. One thing we have going is that, it is only a small area in the region. It's not the whole Northwest that burns, but small little, all it takes is a couple truckloads and makes a huge difference. So I guess I'm kind of talking in circles, but it has huge impact on what we do. We don't have a lot of choices. We just have to deal with it.
I think last year we were we were about 80% of what we put through our stud mill was burned timber. So it's a big deal. So we focus first on the smaller trees going into the lumber production. And then the longer that stand is from the burn date, more degradation, more bugs get in it. We have to shift then over to the plywood side, because you can take that wood that has a few wormholes in it and it'll work fine for core, and it can be repaired. In lumber, even though it might make grade, the consumer doesn't want it.
As always, friends, thank you for listening. Hopefully you found at least one key insight from this discussion that was led by Mr. Matt Saunders of John Burns Real Estate, and it featured Mr. George Emmerson, board chair at Sierra Pacific, Steve Patterson, president and CEO of Central Valley, Steve Swanson, president and CEO of the Swanson Group, and Mr. Victor Fresca, VP of Sales and Operations at Dixieline. The reality is getting that much talent to sit on a board and share their candid perspectives is incredibly valuable. So if you got any sort of value from this, I would strongly encourage to share it with your team so they can become more knowledgeable in looking at a broader lens of what's happening in our industry all the way through that supply chain. And if you are in the state of California and you are not a member of the WCLBMA Association, that is the West Coast LBM Association, you are absolutely missing out. You can learn more and you can register to be a member by going to lumberassociation.org. That is lumberassociation.org. That's all we've got for today. As always, thank you for listening. I want to thank our presenting sponsor, Capital One Trade Credit. If you're interested in growing top-line revenue while decreasing risk, check out Capital One Trade Credit. As for me, I want to make this the best podcast you listen to. So if you have recommendations for improvement or future guests or ways that we can make this better based on other podcasts you listen to inside or outside the industry, I'm all ears. I am directly accessible at bradley@bradleyhartmanandco.com. We're going to close out like we always do with our leadership mantra. You, my friend, are owed nothing. Deliver value first. Make it a great week.